You're very welcome back to Gript, everyone. We have a very special guest with us today, a man who hasn't been seen in quite a while in the Irish media. His name is George Hook. So George, thanks very much for coming in.
No, thank you for having me.
And it's great to have you.
George, I haven't put on a clean shirt for about a year, so you've given me the opportunity to put on a clean shirt.
But your
so
makeup's just as good as ever. So George, can you tell us what you've been up to since we last seen you, I think, with News Talk?
Absolutely, in a sentence, nothing. And it's really interesting. I think my next job really should be talking to people about retiring, because everybody says, my granddad retired and he was dead within 3 weeks. So there's this kind of pressure that when you retire, you must immediately do another job 40 hours a week, or you'll die. And then the second thing is preparation for retirement. So, I didn't prepare at all. I was working on the 1st of December and I wasn't working on the 2nd of December. And I had done nothing to prepare for that, right? So the first piece of advice is don't retire in December because it's dark, it's wet, then Christmas comes along, which is the most depressing time of the year, and January comes along, okay? So it's depressing anyway, do you know what I mean? And suddenly you've retired and you don't know what to do, and all your friends are telling you, you gotta do something, you gotta do something. So what did I do, right? So the first thing I did was I started pouring gin tonics at 1 o'clock in the day, right? Now, it's important to understand that I don't actually drink. I'm probably the world's worst drinker.
But you've started.
But I've started. I'm retired. So I pour gin tonics about 1, and then I turn on the cowboy movies on television. Now, this is past tense, I have to tell you, but this is December, January, right? So I'm drinking gin tonic and I'm watching John Wayne, Audie Murphy, all the boys, Cowboys and Indians for the next 6 hours. Then 7 o'clock, Ingrid calls me, dinner? So I come in for dinner, right, after 6 hours of gin tonics and Cowboys. I have dinner. I go to bed. I fall asleep, okay?
Are you happy as Larry?
No, I'm not.
No.
Right? I'm not happy.
What
right?
about gardening and golf?
Well, the first, when I got married, right, I said, before I got married, I sent Ingrid a letter with a kind of a listed things. And number 1 was, if you want grass, you can cut the grass yourself. So we immediately paved front and back, so I don't
Gardening's out the window.
Yeah, golf's okay, but the problem with golf is you're playing with all old people, and I don't want to play with old people.
They take the energy out of you.
So anyway, the gin and the Cowboys are going on during December and January, and then so I said, you'll have to do something. So I stopped drinking gin, I stopped drinking cowboy movies, and then I started doing things. Now, there's a slight problem here. Because everybody's telling you must do something. So therefore you think, I must do something. So I think, I'll do podcasts, and I'll do this, and I'll do that. And it's very nice. People come up to me and say, we miss you on television, or we miss you on the radio. But that wasn't very good for me, because I kept thinking, I've got to go back. But why do I want to go back where I've just left? And then my 2 daughters take me aside, right? One in Dublin and one in London separately, and they beat sense into me and they said, Dad, you're retired, okay? So February comes and I've got 2 grandsons playing in St Mary's College on the JCT, then kind of on the 15th, so I'm watching them every Wednesday and Saturday. I've got 9 grandchildren, and I suddenly discovered, there's a lot here. I do play golf, I must confess, but I'm not frantic about it. And if I played bridge, I think I'd shoot myself first. If I thought I had to play bridge, I'd die.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah.
But,
I'm retired.
But old habits die hard, do they? Do you miss the media game?
Well, yes and no. I think if I seriously missed it, right, I'd be unhappy. And that's what happened to me in December and January. I missed it and I was unhappy, and I was looking at the guy doing the rugby and saying, I could do it better than him. Or I was listening to the radio and saying, I can do it better than him. And And that's disastrous. So what I do now is I don't listen to the radio, okay? And what I do is when I watch the rugby, I only watch the match. I don't watch the prelims. Not that, like, I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. That's not my point. My point is I don't beat myself up about it. So I just watch the match. So I'm very comfortable not being involved in the media. And here I am talking to you, but I'm not. I'm happy.
And George, does it ever upset you how it ended in the eyes of some of your colleagues? Acrimoniously, some would say, or surrounded with controversy?
I think there's a certain thing about living by the sword and dying by the sword, you know. I mean, if you think of me as a rugby commentator or as a radio commentator or a writer on newspapers, I tended, to call a spade in that sense. So therefore, I paid a price for it. Do I regret it? I never regret it and still don't what I meant to say. But I do regret how I said it. In other words, if I had, and the problem with live broadcasting is the most dangerous thing in the world, as countless people have found. If I had thought about it or whatever.
But you meant well. At the end of the day, your words were out of concern.
Well, I mean, I don't feel like defending myself because I don't feel I have to. But I'm a man with daughters. I'm a grandfather with granddaughters. I am concerned increasingly in this modern world. I was concerned that women were taking risks, and my point was to say, hold on here. You've got to think before, and we all do it. We all make mistakes, and I paid a price for it. But what I think is much more important, funny enough, than George Hook, what I think is much more important than George Hook, is we are seeing terror within the media. So Kevin Myers is gone, George Hook is gone. So suddenly, if I'm 35 years of age and I'm trying to make a career in the media, I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to say anything wrong, not so much wrong, but I'm not going to say anything controversial here because I might lose my job.
Yeah, one thought crime and you're gone almost.
Yeah, so what we're seeing an increasing political correctness creep into radio, television, and newspapers, and less critical comment. You see, I think what democracy is all about, in a phrase, is I don't like what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it. And it's interesting, when I think about some of the things I said, and even that last day when I talked, I'm about 7 years of age, right? My father takes me to London, right? It's 1948. We're still looking at Blitz-torn London,
And rubble everywhere.
Everywhere. And he shows me London, and we go to Buckingham Palace and Madame Tussauds and all that thing. But we went to Hyde Park Corner, and this is little 7-year-old holding his father's hand, and there's all these guys on soapboxes at Hyde Park Corner, right? And there's communists, and there's atheists, and there's every form of speech. And I remember my father saying to me, he said, this is what freedom is about. He said, all those people can say what they like and nobody's going to stop them. Don't have to agree with it, but they can say it. And that stuck with me all my life. And then the other thing he said to me, because I was terribly close to my father, I mean, I adored my father. The other thing he said to me was, he said, never be afraid to have an opinion. Hold it, no matter what, keep your opinion. And I did that, so that's what I have no problems with what happened. I really don't like it, I have no problems at all. It happened, and it happened to me at a point in my life when I should be, I should be cutting the grass anyway, so no, I don't have any problem.
Do you think is that fear of offending creeping down into the public, the day-to-day conversations between men and women and friends, that people are afraid that their opinions might see them ostracized?
Well, you see, the big problem I think really is social media, and people now are essentially worried about Twitter, right? But Twitter represents, if we could only find out how many people, Twitter represents a tiny percentage of the total population. But television producers doing the program, and the next minute they turn around to Twitter and say, what are they saying about my program? And the program is ruled by what? A number of lunatics on Twitter.
It is a disproportionate influence.
But of course it's disproportionate. But social media is totally disproportionate. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So that's not going to change. So what we do have to find out is, how do we live with it? So that's for the next generation of media people like you. How are you going to live with it? It's not for me to decide how I live with it. It's how are you going to live with it?
Well, as far as I can see, the next thing coming down the tracks is hate speech laws, and that certain things that you might want to say or you might believe will be out of bounds. And we're seeing it in other countries, and I don't see why it won't be implemented here as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, if you essentially say, I cannot be offended. And there's an enormous number of people now, in essence, say, I can't be offended. But I'm absolutely entitled to offend you, you know, I mean, within reason. But of course I'm entitled to offend you, and that's the way life is. And that's the way life has been for centuries. But that's no longer the case. You cannot offend. And we'll never again see, I think, you know, I think it'll be harder for the Dunphys and the Myers and all these kind of people, and we're already seeing it, less and less critical commentary.
But the mob, as far as I can see, really came after people like yourself, and I can think of other men like John Waters, and you mentioned Kevin Myers and others. The mob went after them, and their employers pretty much bowed to the pressure. Maybe they agreed with that mob. And what we've seen essentially is scapegoats being made of people like yourself. And I just think it sets a very dangerous precedent going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the mob does tend to indicate that there's a lot of them. The point is, I think there aren't many in the mob, but they have a disproportionate voice. That's the point of it. I remember I saw Kevin Myers on television before it happened to me, and Kevin said, everything they wrote about me was lies, he said, you know, and I'm sitting there watching television and I'm saying, come on, Kevin, you know, we journalists don't tell lies. And then when it happened to me, everything they wrote about me was lies. Everything they wrote about me was lies. And people watching this will say, come on, George, they'll react to me saying that. But it was. And there's a wonderful movie, because I'm a movie buff, and there's a wonderful movie with Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford about Watergate. And in that, the crucial thing was, Ben Bradley, who was the editor, he said, you must get corroboration. We're not going to print what you have here unless you get corroboration. And you see these two guys making phone calls. Can they get corroboration? What they're going to write is correct. And then they get the corroboration. You should say, got it, you know? Everything written about me in post that event had no corroboration. It was extraordinary. Now, if you were to meet the people who wrote those articles and said to them, you know, are you a journalist of standards and everything? They'd all say, absolutely. You know, I have a master's in journalism and I'm this and I'm that and the other thing. But I was fair game, or Myers was fair game, or Waters was fair game. And therefore they felt, well, we don't have to. And the other thing is, like, there is a thing that says in modern day journalism, corroboration is that if we send you a text and say, we're going to say this about you, and you don't answer the text, then it must be true. So why should I have to answer the text? It's not my business to answer the text. And I always remember the following weekend after the crisis, a pal of mine said to me, look, George, if I were you, I'd get out of town for the weekend, go away to a hotel, because there'll be a bit of a frenzy, the Sunday papers and everything. So when I go home to the lovely Ingrid and I say, listen, we should get out of town for the weekend. And she says, I'm not going to be run out of my home, she says. We'll go to Super Value and we'll get groceries for the siege. So anyway, we get groceries for the siege. And that Saturday, they were in their hordes outside my front door, the media. And I was inside watching television, and they could see me watching television, so they knocked on my window, they knocked on my front door, they punched messages through my letterbox, they sent me texts on my mobile phone, and but they had no corroboration for any story. And like they went, one of them went back. They went back 50 years on one occasion looking for a story, and then another one, they went back over 25 years in looking for a story. 50 years ago, Hook did this, so therefore he must be a bad guy. But none of it was true, and none of it had corroboration. So was I upset? Yeah, but like, I was more upset for my family than it was about me. Like, I'm big enough and ugly enough to take this, and I'm worried about it now.
Ingrid sounds like a real Joan of Arc, but as far as I can see, and I assume the public have continued to hold you in great esteem and probably receive you with great warmth. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, it's funny that like I still can't really go anywhere without somebody coming up to me. Like, I played golf yesterday and somebody came up to me and said, we really miss you, or something like that. And obviously there's a big rugby story with the squad announced for the World Cup. People coming up to me yesterday and saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? I mean, it's lovely, and it's I hope they don't stop, because I love it, because I'm just an old egotist, I love it. But like, I'm not making any comebacks, That's just not what I want to do.
And so if you were there speaking to the nation from your seat as a radio presenter, what would you be thinking nowadays with what Ireland's facing with Brexit in particular?
Well, like, when I talk about no regrets, I do actually regret, because what stories there are that I would be getting my teeth into. Like, there is the worst Irish government in history, right? So, like, I voted Fine Gael all my life.
You're a real blue shirt.
I'm the original blue shirt. I'm the only guy left. Jim Glennon, formerly a senator in TD. I keep saying Jim Glennon, who's Fianna Fáil. I'm the last guy fighting the Civil War, right? So I'm a blue shirt. Vote Fine Gael. I could not bring myself to vote Fine Gael in the last local elections in Europe, because this is the worst government ever. This is the worst Taoiseach ever. I mean, to have a triumvirate like Varadkar, Harris and Murphy, who are so, like, the Children's Hospital, the homeless situation, Brexit. I mean, like, who knows what the hell's coming in down the track, and nobody's talking to us. But like, Fine Gael have always been a very old-fashioned party. Like, if you look at Fine Gael, the WT conscripts, straight after the Civil War, they rebuilt the country. Liam Conscript, John Bruton, Garrett Fitzgerald, they were quite boring guys, really, in a way, but they were people of intense integrity, and Fine Gael was a boring old party.
And really. They also had an intellect that isn't typically seen today.
But Fine Gael was a boring old party, really. And then they said, when Enda left, we get really trendy, we'll have a gay Taoiseach, and we'll have a photogenic Taoiseach, and we'll have a doctor Taoiseach, so suddenly Fine Gael are trendy. We're not boring anymore, and then we'll get some middle class guy to look after the poor. Now, can middle class people look after the poor? Absolutely. Absolutely. Some of the wealthiest people in politics in Britain and Ireland and America have looked after the poor, but they were driven by a real, I don't think there's any driving Murphy to make life better for the poor in Ireland. Harris is just, a Twitterati. Like, Harris thinks that he can run the country by Twitter. So, like, that scares life. I would be apoplectic on radio. And then you look across the floor, right? For the first time ever, you have Fianna Fáil not attempting to take advantage of the government. For the first time ever, Fianna Fáil said, it's okay, carry on, yeah, it's great, it's great, it's great.
It is remarkable that the opposition isn't acting like the opposition.
We don't have an opposition. So that scares the hell out of me, and I'd be going bananas. And then there's rugby, like, you know, I'd be losing my reason about the rugby if I was on television. So, like, I regret it in that sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so much to get your teeth into now. You look at, like, I have a number of heroes, like Michael Collins, Winston Churchill, strange bedfellows, but two of my great heroes. You look at Churchill, you look at Attlee as leader of the Labour Party immediately after the war. You even look at Harold Macmillan and these. And then we've got Boris Johnson. And before Boris Johnson, we had May. And before May, we had the guy whose name I can't even remember. He was so nobody, right? So, and then on the other side, like, you have a communist. You have an anti-Semite and a communist leading the Labour Party. The Labour Party is now an anti-Semitic political party, right? And that's Britain and us.
So in terms of the UK and Ireland, what has caused this low calibre of politician to emerge in your view?
I actually think that once politics was a noble profession. I really believe that politics was a noble profession. I now think that with the advent of first television, and after all, John F. Kennedy became President of America by television. Again, the great debates against Nixon, he was better on television, whereas he might not necessarily have been better. Do you know what I mean? So first of all, it was television changed it. Now social media has changed it. Like, you can now get elected almost by Twitter. Do you know?
So it's just a marketing contest now?
It's a marketing contest. It's you know...
But aren't we the ones who are ultimately responsible for putting these people in positions of power, and therefore it's ultimately us going into the ballot box who are to blame?
Yes, but my great hero Winston Churchill said, you know, democracy isn't a very good system, but it's the best we have. So therefore, I'm perfectly happy if the majority of people in Ireland go to the box, but the majority of people aren't doing it, because if the majority of people voted for Fine Gael, we'd have a Fine Gael government. We don't have a Fine Gael government. You know, we have Minister Ross going to an imaginary electric pump up in Marley Park and saying, "Isn't it wonderful to be filling my car full of electric?" But the actual machine hasn't even been connected to the mains. But it's a great photo opportunity. So this is about photo opportunity, and that's worrying. Like, I remember my first worry about Varadkar's candidacy, and I always felt Coveney was a better candidate, but was like when he wooed the media with tea cakes, you know, like the media were wooed
on Leo Street.
Yeah, by tea cakes. I mean, come on. And
so, George, I want to cover one other topic that really interested me. You wrote at one stage an article about how you'd been quite sick in hospital, and I think you were in for knee surgery that didn't seem to be going too well.
Right.
And you described in the article, if I'm not mistaken, how that was a moment in which you had some kind of mystical awakening of sorts. And so what exactly happened there? Was it a fear? That pierced your heart?
No. Let's get it straight. The knee surgery was fantastic. In fact, the guy, Philip Brady, who did it, in 2 weeks later, I threw the sticks away and I was playing golf in about 6 weeks later. He did a phenomenal job on my knee, right? But I'm going in first week in January to get my knee done, okay? Now, great tradition with us is on Christmas Day, the kids go to all the other families, right? And Ingrid and I have lunch in the Westbury. Treat ourselves to lunch in the Westbury. But then, Stephen's Day, we all get together. So last Stephen's Day, then 3 years ago now, my knee, it was 16 of us, now 17. We've had another edition. So we all get together, right? And you have this cacophony of accents, the Cork grandchildren, the Dublin grandchildren, the London grandchildren, and so on, so on, so on. But I know that in January, I'm going in to get my knee done. And I know I'm not going to come out of the anaesthetic. I know I'm going to die on the table. Okay?
You were just certain that was
Oh yeah, I'm a goner, okay? So imagine now, I'm surrounded by my family on Stephen's Day, turkey and all the time. This is my last Christmas, Okay, it's my last Christmas with my family, right? I'm convinced of it, like I'm absolutely certain. So anyway, into the Blackrock Clinic for Philip Brady. So I come in the day before, obviously, to get ready. So I'm in the Blackrock Clinic anyway, and I think, gotta sort myself out here. Priest, right? So priest comes up, you see, and he says, how are you, George? I said, Father, I'm not going to make it tomorrow. I've got to sort myself out. Now I'm a believer, like, I mean, I've always believed in God and all that sort of stuff. So I said, I've got to make everything right, you know. Okay, George, he says, and I said, look, it's a while since I've been at confession. He said, it's okay, we can square that away. And I said, most of my sins really are of the erotic nature, right? Okay. So he says, don't worry, George, we can fix that too, right? So anyway, I said, no idea, this is my last confession, and most of my sins have been erotic nature, and I'm like, I didn't abuse my parents, or I didn't tell lies.
We don't want a live confession, George, please.
So anyway, so now he says, Georgie says, make an act of contrition, okay? I can't tell you when I last said an act of contrition. But it's a bit like, you know the way when you hear a song and you haven't heard it for about 20 years, you can still sing along. Mm-hmm. Well, the act of contrition was like that. It all came back to me. And I nailed it. I nailed the act of contrition verbatim, right? True purpose of amendment, never sin again. And the Father says, okay, 3 Hail Marys, right? 3 Hail Marys.
You were ready to meet your maker.
I've got it. Right? But then I thought, hold on here, but what about a bit of insurance, right? So I called for the Church of Ireland minister.
Did you?
Right? Now, Church of Ireland minister is actually a good pal of mine.
Right.
I mean, so it wasn't kind of utterly out of the blue. And it happens to be female, because as you know, Church of Ireland ordains females. So, Church of Ireland rector comes in, how are you, George? Worried about tomorrow? Okay. Prayers for the Church of Ireland, thanks very much. So now I'm in business, right? I'm covered.
Did you have last rites?
No, I didn't have last rites. But I mean, I'm my immortal soul's in good shape, all right?
That's right.
Now, here's the question. What do you do on your last night on earth, right? What would you do on your last night on earth? Well, you're not going to go to sleep. I mean, why would you waste 8 hours sleeping, right? So you're obviously going to stay awake to get as much as you can. So what did I do? I watched every episode of the series Breaking Bad on my laptop, right? So I'm here inside, sitting by the bed, right, with Breaking Bad on my laptop, right? And it was this little Filipino nurse, a guy, right? And he'd come in every hour or so, he said, are you okay? And I said, don't worry, I'm fine, right?
And had you said goodbye to Ingrid?
Oh, no, I didn't say anything to anybody.
No, you didn't want to upset her.
Well, I said goodbye to her, but she didn't know it was goodbye. So then they wheeled me up the following morning, and the whole thing about doing these knee operations, the speed at which you can do it, the really good guys, the speed at which you do it prevents infection and so on. Your man Brady's a star at this, and he goes, and 55 minutes later, I'm awake. Woohoo!
A changed man.
And so that's it.
Fantastic.
That's it.
So, George, looking forward to the Rugby World Cup. The big controversy at the moment is Devon Toner's absent, and Will Addison as well, to a lesser extent. Is it a mistake?
Well, when Joe Schmidt was about 3 weeks at Leinster, he just arrived, and I said he was no good, you know, and I've consistently believed he was no good since he arrived. And I've taken, as you can imagine, enormous stick as they win match after match, Six Nations after Six Nations, Grand Slam after Grand Slam, and beat New Zealand twice, right? George is, you know, that's a pretty bad assessment by old George, but I stand by it. Right? I've never bought, Joe Schmidt is the greatest PR machine in the history of rugby coaching, and I've never bought the Joe Schmidt PR, right? Because I think, first of all, we have played an incredibly predictable game. Do it very well, Mark, but but incredibly predictable. Now we've been found out, so everybody knows now how Ireland are going to play, and they know that. So this is 2007 all over again. If I can just remind you about 2007.
I haven't forgot. Painful.
France, Eddie O'Sullivan, the players actually said, one of them said, we're going to win the World Cup. We didn't get out of the group. We were beaten by France and Argentina, right? Team were in disarray mentally, and it showed on the pitch. I think there are disturbing connections between 07 and 19.
But in fairness to Schmidt, he's achieved more than any other Irish coach has.
But Eddie O'Sullivan had achieved more than any other Irish coach had up to that time, and we didn't get out of the pool.
But now, Schmidt's raised the bar, hasn't he? Just admit it, he has.
Okay, he has. But at what price, like? The question is, at what price? Here's the question. For the last, certainly 12 months or 18 months, my barber, my taxi driver, or anybody says, are we going to win the World Cup, George? Are we going to win the World Cup, George? Now, if you said to any Irish rugby supporter, which would you prefer? Beat New Zealand twice or win the World Cup?
You'd win the World Cup, take that every time.
Correct. Are we going to win the World Cup? No. For the first time, people are actually wondering, are we going to beat Japan? Are we actually going to get out of the group? If we get out of the group, we meet New Zealand or South Africa, so you can forget it.
But right? Is it just that the team has peaked too soon, basically, and they've reached the far side of the hill and they're going downward?
But hold a while. Whether you're an Olympic athlete, a rugby team, if you're in any kind of sport, the trick, if there is a trick, it is to peak on time. It was a fella called Ronnie Delaney, and it's 1956, and it's Melbourne, Australia, and nobody's ever heard of him, and he wins the 1500 metres in 3:41.2. Nobody can take away from Ronnie Delaney that he won the Olympic 1500 metres. Not what he did before, not what he did after, but he won the Olympic Games. This is Schmidt's Olympics. His record already is hockeyed by Argentina in the quarter-final the last time out. So what is now the record? Because history is the record. What does history say if, and we're at the if point, if his record is we don't get past the quarter-final? We've never got past the quarter-final in World Rugby history. We've never got past the quarter-final. Beating New Zealand twice in that context is less if you can't deliver on the Rugby World Cup. So now you come to what has he done, right? There are chinks. What happens when you're a coach? And I was an international coach. I coached in the Rugby World Cup. What happens is you come under pressure. You start to lose the players. Once the players stop thinking you're omnipotent, because they always think the coach is omnipotent, once they start thinking that, chinks appear. And I think that's happening now. So if you go back to February against England, he picks Robbie Henshaw at full-back. An extraordinary decision. In front of Carney and Lormer. At that point, Henshaw had 67 minutes rugby under his belt. Hadn't played full-back since, the flood. Big error, huge error. We get hockeyed by England. Henshaw has a nightmare. First mistake. Now, we look at Toner, right? We have a malfunctioning line-out. 2 of the 3 hookers cannot throw the ball in accurately, all right? In fact, 2 of the 3 hookers would have difficulty hitting the barn door from inside the barn, all right? Now, the one thing you have is you have the tallest guy in the history of Irish rugby standing at number 2. Not only standing at number 2, but calling the shots. And for 50-odd out of the 60-odd matches that Schmidt has been charged, this guy's been standing number 2. So you're stuck, you're 5 metres from your line. We've got to win this line, lads, or we're in deep manure. Toner, bang, we win it, right? Now no Toner. Instead of which, we have a guy from South Africa who's barely got off the boat.
So
no, hold on, let's get the South African guy. 2 days after he qualifies to play for Ireland, having admittedly a lengthy holiday of 3 years, but essentially a holiday in Ireland for 3 years, he gets picked for Ireland. He gets picked for Ireland. No, if he were, like if he were the greatest second row that ever lived from, you know, the high veld, I'd be all on to put him on. But is he? No.
So George,
he's average.
I think this gets
average. Have we time left on this interview to say average another couple of times?
I want to ask you this because I think it really gets to the crux of the matter. If those players were under a different coach, do you think those players are good enough to win a World Cup? Yeah. If they were under a Czech or a Gatland or another type of coach? Because you can run down Schmidt all you like, but if they weren't able to win a World Cup under what you might consider a better coach, then they were never going to anyway.
Well, they might have. You see, the thing is that a different coach might not have beaten the living daylights out of them over the last 60 matches. Ireland plays the most attritional rugby of any other country in the world. Like, there's a lot of people watching this who aren't rugby people, so they're saying, what the hell is he talking about? I don't know about scrums and lions and mauls. But if they watch, and they do, the great Bill O'Hurley, God rest him, said to me when I first went on television, he said, George, remember, 75% watching rugby on television don't understand it, so talk to them. So let's talk to the 75%. They know that the ball rarely goes beyond the first centre, that Murray to a forward, crash, Murray to a forward, crash. And this goes on interminably until they get 5 metres from the line, somebody crashes over. The pain that these players are suffering over a period of time. So what you have is not about now, it's about what has happened over the last 60 matches. Plan A, no plan B. We're doing the same thing now as we did 60 matches ago, so everybody else knows it. 2, everybody else is changing, everybody else is doing different things. And 2, Sexton's a really good example. The physical pain that Sexton has undergone for Ireland, for his country, is enormous. And like we saw again just in the last Six Nations. At one point, Sexton almost couldn't restart the match. Like, he was so bad. So again, where is he? I don't know where he is because I'm not involved. But like, we cannot win anything without Sexton and Murray.
So you think those players have been mismanaged over a number of years?
I think that, by my standards, they've been mismanaged. Yeah, they've played the most attritional game of any country in the world. So therefore, their lifespan, if you like, is less. And I think they're hurting. And I think also they're saying, now, they're not going to say it. There's a wonderful piece by Luke Fitzgerald in The Independent who he said, the players aren't going to complain. They're earning $300,000 a year because this coach employs them. They're not going to turn around and say, tough luck, coach, and lose $300,000 a year when out in the marketplace they might get 30. So they're not going to say anything. They're going to go and they're going to play. But that doesn't mean that they're happy about it. They know that they're seeing other teams and they're seeing the way other teams are playing in the build-up to this World Cup. And they have to be questioning, what are we doing? Just like 07. They did it in 07. This is a rerun.
We've seen a much better performance against Wales, and would that suggest...
I know, hold on, back up, Chuck. Against Wales C. Like they propped forward.
Well, it wasn't Ireland A either.
Yeah, but like Gatland. The real thing is, how are we going to do the next time we meet Wales when he puts out a real team? That's the question. And even if we beat them in a warm-up, even if we beat them, you know, the real thing is going to come is when we play Scotland, Japan, and hopefully South Africa or New Zealand. That's the test. Who cares about the warm-up matches? Do you know? Nobody cares.
So you think that there's no hope? Cancel your tickets if you're going to Japan, get your refunds?
I'd never say there's no hope, like, but this is not the coach that I think can deliver. I don't see what people forget very quickly was Michael Cheika at Leinster. What Michael Cheika did at Leinster. Like, Schmidt didn't come into Leinster and Leinster were on the floor and they were being beaten every week and suddenly he made them into this wonderful team. Everybody forgets all the work Cheika did. You know, Schmidt came into a really good Leinster setup and he improved that. He also, remember, came into an Irish setup that had won a Grand Slam under Kidney. So, like, he didn't actually come in and work miracles. You know, he had a basis on which to work. He also had an extraordinary fly half in the shape of Sexton. But, like, don't forget, and this is crucial, why is Simon Zebo in France? Why is Ian Madigan in Bristol? Like,
Donegal Ryan.
Because, why? Why?
Wages.
No. Because the way this team runs, it's my way or the highway. And like the one fella who doesn't work well on the my way or the highway thing is Zebo. So Zebo gets, you know, the heave-ho. Madigan. Like, they went down to Argentina and they didn't bring Madigan, which was outrageous. So Madigan knew immediately, there's no place for me here. Leinster, in fact, picked Jimmy Goppert, who wasn't even eligible for Ireland, at fly half in front of Madigan. Now, is Madigan the second best out half? No, I don't know. But he's playing over there instead of over here. Zebo certainly should be in any Irish team in the World Cup, but he can't because he's over there, not over here. So, like, we have to ask those kind of questions, and I didn't ask them. Luke Fitzgerald asked them. Luke Fitzgerald asked the question, why are these, and I mean, what Fitzgerald has done, and I really hope he has a great media career, because he is the first person to start to challenge the coach. Like, you see, why do the media not challenge the coach? It's very simple, right? Very simple.
They want interviews.
Correct. So, like, you say, Joe Schmidt is horse manure, and then you ring up and say, hello, Joe, Mickey Murphy from the Irish Daily here. Can I interview Johnny on Tuesday? Sorry, Johnny's very busy.
But George, how can he go from hero to zero and somehow just be horse manure if he's reached those peaks with Ireland, taking them to the heights, really, as high as you can go without a World Cup?
But it's without a World Cup, sure, that's the whole point. No, but what about Kidney?
It's a total exaggeration to say he's horse manure.
Eddie got 3 Triple Crowns, right? Kidney got Triple Crowns and a Grand Slam. Kidney got the first Grand Slam since 1948, right? So, like, there have been other coaches that have done this. It's not as if, and I keep saying this, it's not as if Joe has come in and suddenly, for the last 120 years, Ireland were rubbish, and suddenly Joe arrived in a fiery chariot from Wellington, New Zealand, or wherever he comes from, and said, listen, I lead you to the promised land. Do we beat New Zealand? Absolutely. But the Irish women beat New Zealand, like, you know. So,
fair play
like,
to them.
No, but like, you must put it in some kind of perspective. You must put it in some kind of perspective. And what we're never going to know, because I'm going to be dead. But if you go to the premier brain trauma hospital in Boston, he'll open the deep freeze for you, and he has about 100 brains in there frozen by American footballers who deeded their brains to science because they know there will be another massive legal case against the NFL in which their families will be recompensed for the damage to them. Why is a young quarterback at the Indianapolis Colts turned down a contract worth $500 million, walked away from the game? Because he's not prepared to put his brain on hold, you know? Now, what we don't know, because there's no x-ray, there's no MRI scan, there's nothing can tell us about traumatic brain injury. The only way we can find out about traumatic brain injury is die, and somebody cuts it open. Now, professional football hasn't been around long enough for us to see those brains. And I wish Brian O'Driscoll no ill, or Johnny Sexton no ill, or any professional rugby player no ill. But until we see the damage, and this is in Ireland, this is the game, until we see the damage that this game has done to the brains of young men, and Absolutely certain of it. Like you're reading about HIA test, he passed the HIA test and he is now undergoing the protocols for return to play. HIA test my eye, right? It's the same as when I was playing. How many fingers can you see, George?
It hasn't done your brain any harm all your playing days.
No, but I didn't there weren't 350 tackles in the amateur game. There weren't 50 consecutive rucks. That's the difference.
The collisions were a lot less.
Well, of course they were, because Brother Athanasius, when I went to press at 7 years of age, Brother Athanasius said, if there's two fellas in front of you, George, run for the space. So for 100 years, rugby players ran at space. Now the game is don't run at space. Run at the nearest big fella. So there's 300 pounds of flesh here. There's 300 pounds of flesh here. They're running at 20 miles an hour. If you remember your old primary school arithmetic, the impact is now at the combined speeds 40 miles an hour, and obviously so now there's 600 pounds colliding at 40 miles an hour. Knees haven't got stronger, hips haven't got stronger, and most importantly, brains haven't got stronger. And we're looking at players and it saddens me. It saddens me. We are now looking at players who I have no doubt, not Irish, players world over, who are hurt. And we're going to see the same case that happened in America where they had to pay out $1 billion. I'm absolutely convinced there are lawyers now with offices full of claims for this, and it's going to happen. And it's terribly sad for a game I love, a game I spent my entire life to.
It's very serious. I do want to ask you one more question though about the World Cup.
You're a great man for one more question. Yeah, go on.
Who will be the last team left standing?
South Africa.
Not England.
No!
Haven't a chance.
No, that's not true. England have a chance. Like, England have some great strengths. Like, they've the two Vinopola boys who are really special. Ford has come back into his own, and I really like him. Farrell, a great goal kicker. So they've got a lot of pluses, But South Africa, I think, have the best coach in the tournament. Their performance against New Zealand has been amazing. Like, they played them 3 times now just recently. Win, draw, loss. Total difference in points, 2. Mm-hmm. Like, that's tremendous. Johnny Giles used to always refuse to make forecasts, because he used to say, I'm not a fortune teller. So when you make a forecast, you're not a fortune teller. It's an opinion. Mm-hmm. My opinion is, I'd love to see South Africa win. I'd love to see a South African team, a real South African team, not the one that won before with 14 white fellas and 1 black fella, and a black president, and Mandela did wonders.
You want diversity?
I to see a South African team, and what they're doing is extraordinary, because they have positive discrimination. They can't pick their best team because they have to have so many black guys on the team, right? So it's not their best team. Because the best team might actually be 15 white fellas, you know what I mean? It might be 15 Afrikaners.
But I'm surprised you're of that opinion. Shouldn't it just be based on merit, who gets selected, be it in rugby,
that is a big problem.
In rugby or politics?
Well, sport has always been about merit, right? Sport has always been about merit. And I was never happy with positive discrimination in rugby, never. And when they brought in the current numbers, I said, South Africa will never win anything ever again. The most extraordinary thing is how well they've done with that, right? Because they could actually be better, and extraordinary. But also, and I was part of the Irish anti-apartheid movement in my time, and spoke at rugby dinners against going to South Africa and stuff like that. There are certain times when you look at a situation, the tragedy for South Africa is that the black people have been abandoned by their own. Like the ANC, when we could be here all night now, the ANC has abandoned their own people, but for me, part of my heart is talking to. I'd love to see South Africa do it. I look at the South African Sevens team, mostly black players, because they don't have to get, big second rows or whatever. I'd just love to see it. I really would. Like the whole idea of the Rainbow Nation. emotional, like when they sing South African national anthem in 3 different languages, you know. I get very emotional about that. But then I get emotional about the Marseillaise as well. So.
Well, George Hook, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, no, you've been very good because you let me talk forever and you've barely got a word in edgeways.
You're great fun.
You've barely got a word in edgeways.
No, delighted. Well, thanks.